Hi, everybody. This is Katie White, and I am so glad that you are all here today as folks are trickling in. Wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping things just so that you know where everything is. In the webinar, I see folks have very quickly and easily found the chat box, and I am grateful to see everybody. As you come in, just pop into the chat box, let us know that you see us, send us a hello and where you're from, or if there are folks that are listening in with you at your desk. We are happy that you're all here and are really looking forward to a great conversation today. A couple of other things that I want to point you to. There's a files to download box right next to the chat box that has a copy of the PowerPoint for today, as well as 2 resources that we'll spend some time going over during the webinar. In addition to being able to click on those and download them right now, we're also recording the webinar, and so once we are all done, we'll send you a copy of this recording as well as those resources so that you can have that. There are a lot of links in the PowerPoint that'll be really valuable to download and have access to. If you are in and can hear me and can see the chat that's going on, then you are in the right place and you are doing everything just right. If you are having trouble hearing me or hearing others, there are a couple of tips on the screen right now to check, both in terms of checking your mute settings or the volume on your computer. If you're hearing a delay or it sounds like it's breaking up, it may be the Wi-Fi connection, and so either switching to a stronger Wi-Fi or to Ethernet can help that. I also find that it helps to close down other programs that are on your computer, not just so that you pay more attention, but it actually does help the Adobe Connect to run a little bit faster. We are excited to have so many of you all here today and interested in this conversation, so we have put everyone in listen-only mode just to control the audio quality, but there will be a time for questions later on during one of the panel conversations, and so as part of that, if you have questions, please put them in the chat box, and I will be keeping an eye out on those and gathering them together so that we can ask all of those questions at the end of our time together today. And with that, I'm going to move us into the webinar. So you are here at the Engaging Family, Engaging Community, Building a Network of Support with Young People webinar. As I said, my name is Katie White. I'm one of the Training and Technical Assistance Managers here at Youth Collaboratory, and we are, and also the focus area lead for our work with building community. So we are excited to have you here and to share this conversation that we've been having for a while and wanted to bring the rest of you into what we're thinking and what we've been learning. So you may be wondering, what do I mean? I'm from Youth Collaboratory. Who is that? If you're unfamiliar with us, we are a national organization that works to harness the power of the youth service community so that we can innovate and evaluate and drive effective strategies that are assuring the safety and well-being of youth and young adults. And why we are doing that is really to provide the space to unlock their limitless potential. And so we are excited to be a part of this work and that this work is only done and is only successful because of our opportunities to collaborate and work with you all in the youth service community. So what does that look like for us? We are, as a national organization, we have a broad reach. Annually, we connect with about 12,000 service providers and funders and researchers, kind of capturing the entire youth service field in that way. Each year, there's usually about 3,000 organizations that we provide training or support to and kind of become our key stakeholders. We attract innovators in the field, and so annually we have over 200 members across 46 states who engage with us regularly to assess emerging issues in their communities, and it's through that work that we're able to generate real-time solutions. Beyond that, we also provide subgrants to about 55 organizations in 36 states throughout the U.S. To pilot or to implement innovative program models. And so this is a lot of what we have learned and are going to be sharing with you today has come out of the work of those subgrants as well as the conversations with our members, and we are excited to bring it all back to you all as part of the youth service field as a whole. So the folks that have been leading this work for us and that are going to spend some time talking today is my colleague Kendon Elliott, who's also a Training and Technical Assistance Manager here at Youth Collaboratory, and Andre Thomas, who works with us as a consultant as part of our Youth Catalyst team. So I will hand it over to you all.
Thanks, Katie. And I just echo your excitement of being here today and having so many folks interested in this topic. And so I want to take a moment to just review what we plan to discuss today. So we want to really dive into the important shift from just thinking narrowly about family engagement to really building a full community of support with young people. That with as opposed to for is very important. Also to explore how engaging family and engaging community strengthens all of our work across geography, setting, agency, focus, and sector. We're going to share some practical strategies and tools to support young people in strengthening connections in their lives. And we have a great group of folks on our panel who are going to also share a lot of insights and strategies that they're using in their communities. And then we're also going to really think about identifying ways to integrate those strategies and tools through the examples that our panelists are going to share today. So with that, I am going to hand it over to my co-host today, Andre, for a poll.
So thank you. Welcome everyone, and we'd like to start off today speaking about family engagement to open up with a poll. So we want everyone to think, when you think engaging community and family in your own environments, what language do you use? So we'll like to bring that over. All right, so it looks like the overwhelming result is family engagement. We see a few people saying family strengthening, permanent connections, and parent engagement. All are particularly helpful and good indications of exactly what we like to go about it. I personally, in my own work, use chosen family and family reunification a lot to speak to that sort of union pieces and the ideas that not everyone's family is, blood related. You have people outside of that scope that you still consider family, people that may be considered to others friends. So, yeah.
So Emily, you can go ahead and move that poll over. Emily's supporting us in the background today. And so we want to appreciate you all participating in that, and we want to share just a little bit about this journey that we've been on. So We've really been working as an organization and having conversations across the field, specifically for the past couple of years, really trying to figure out the magic, or really like what's that secret sauce of connections and relationships in the lives of young people. And what we found as we talked to individuals across different agencies, talking with young people and researchers and folks doing all different types of work, is that we know that this is way bigger than traditional, what we think of as family engagement in terms of biological or family of origin. We know it's bigger than just mentoring. When we talk about services, we know it's bigger than family reunification. But really what we're talking about is this universal need for connection that all of us have innately. And I love this picture of the elephant because I think it really illustrates that, animals in the wild also need this type of connection. And often it's for, the same things that we need connection for. So there's, safety involved, and there's companionship, and there's ways of looking out for one another, and there is learning from the elders, and really being grounded in who that child is and the nurturing that it takes as they grow up. And we know that regardless of the person, that isolation can be really harmful for people and even deadly. And we think about young people, we often in this field talk about, we need to support them in becoming independent. And it's often the goal is independence. And we've really found, as we've had these conversations and dug in, is that our goal really isn't independent, but it's reciprocal relationships, because all of us are interdependent and all people need people. And so as we have this conversation, we really want to think broadly about how this impacts us on a personal level, and who are those people that's sort of your ride or die team that has your back, and what's the impact of that on your life, as well as what does this look like as we're supporting young people in their development. So I did want to share just that I feel like I'm a messenger in this work, but I'm really here to share the collective knowledge from our Youth Collaboratory staff and team, from the Youth Catalyst team, as well as the individuals and organizations across the country that have just been amazing at sharing their insights with us, both the successes and challenges in engaging family and building community. And so I just want to express my gratitude to everyone who's really helped shape the work we're doing in this area and this conversation. So I will hand it to you, Andre.
So keeping to that piece of animals and thinking of the webs of support and humanity, we kind of wanted to compare this idea of a web of support that is not only functional and uniquely catered to the individual that it needs to support and meet the needs of, but we also wanted to represent the idea of, every web is different. Things that work in one person's web of support may not work for another. Things that are maybe more loosely attached to in one circle may work fine in someone else's. So think about how strong and flexible they are, how they don't disengage. It's very hard to break this spider's web, and that's sort of the idea behind the web of support and what we visualize for it. So coming into this, think about not only the unique individuals and characteristics of each spider's web, but also think about how do we build that in our own lives. So how do people go about building their own relationships, ties, and connections, and how can we apply that to others? So, and I will hand that. And keeping on that piece, consider some practical approaches in your own work of engaging community and building up families and things of that sort, but also consider why are you building these relationships? What's the goal is there a goal in mind, or is this something that just sort of happened organic and intentionally? Which methods have worked for you, and do these methods need to change? Those are sort of the general ideas that we wanted to bring up in this webinar. And with that, I would like to introduce to you our panelists. So Caleb Barton is a senior program officer with True Colors United and a member of the legendary House of Garson. They are a young activist and advocate from Texas. Caleb is very passionate about authentic youth collaboration and inclusion, increasing rural access, and ending youth homelessness as it pertains to LGBTQ youth specifically. We have Lindell McAllister. She is a member of the Bridges and Mentoring Program. She's the director of the program for the City of Longview, Partners in Prevention, and has worked with the program since it began in 1995. She is passionate about working with young people and their families. Lindell holds a Master's of Social Work with Child Welfare concentration from the University of Denver. In addition to working with families experiencing poverty, Lindell engages the community to address the individuals and systemic barriers families experience. And last but not least, we have Kelly Sullivan. Kelly, she is a dedicated youth advocate and foster care alumni who joined the Foster and Adoptive Care Coalition in February 2012. She has 15 years of work with transitional age youth and young adults in the foster care system. At the coalition, Kelly works as a connection specialist, connecting youth in care to their personal stories, filling in important details of their life that may have been lost. Kelly considers the well-being of each youth and works with teams to work toward a balanced life. Kelly located and reconnected with her own biological family in 2011, so this is something that she holds very dear. She holds a Bachelor of Arts from Webster University and resides in the city of St. Louis with her 2 children. So welcome to you all, and thank you for joining us so much. With that, I would like to bring up our panel. So hello.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Good to see you all.
So,
So, would you?
yeah, so we want to just kind of hear from everyone, and Caleb, we'll go to you first, of what really brings you to this conversation, and really just the overall work of building a community of support with young people.
Hello, and hi, and thank you for having me again to be a part of this conversation. One of the things that so I'm originally from Marshall, Texas, a small town in East Texas, and so I was raised with kind of this sense of like everybody in your community is kind of part of your family. We all kind of looked out for each other. It's very much a community approach, a village approach to be able to raise people. And so when I actually ventured outside of Texas and moved to Denver, Colorado, I actually kind of sought out a similar dynamic. Wasn't as successful, but I live in Washington, D.C. now, where I became a part of the house and ballroom scene, and specifically I became specifically, I became a part of the House of Garson. So if you're unfamiliar with the House and Ballroom scene, the House of Ballroom scene has been around for, I believe, since the 60s or 70s, and it was birthed out of the drag pageant world. What happened was, during those drag pageants in that time, it was very difficult for Black and brown women to actually place, and they would put in just as much effort into these pageants, and they felt like they were slighted at each one of them. So they created their own pageant world, but it was called the House and Ballroom scene. So I've now been a part of the House of Garcon for about 4 years. If you are familiar with the hit show Pose that comes on FX, it kind of gives a little bit of insight as to what we as the House and Ballroom community face and what we do to be able to address those issues. So currently what we in my house, what we have done is we have worked to be able to create a family dynamic that is very important. We meet regularly, holidays, we spend together, we spend time together. But I was able to, from that, when being connected to the House of Garcon, whenever I was experiencing homelessness, was able to navigate that situation a lot easier because, number one, I had people to lean on. They would look out for me if I needed help with food. They helped me actually access housing. So it was very important for that family dynamic to be a part of my life, especially because my biological family was all the way in Texas. So I found these chosen individuals who I would consider as family who were helping me out. And fast forward to me getting on my feet, and I was actually moved into a townhome about a year ago. And during this process of me being kind of early into the House of Garcon, I encountered quite a few individuals who had different experiences, all of which were identified as queer, Black and brown individuals, all young, youth under the ages of 25, all of them dealing with different types of issues with housing instability, social justice, being HIV positive, all these different things that are impacting their lives. And so at the time of me actually having housing, I felt that it was necessary for me to then take back what the House of Garcon had given to me. So now I, myself and my partner kind of run a host home of sorts where we have right now, we have 5 individuals who live with us who are queer youth of color, who we support and help them to get to wherever their goals are currently. So for me, I think that it's very important for folks to be aware of the dynamics when considering Black and brown queer people, and understand that our systems of support sometimes look a lot different from things that are standard. And unfortunately, historically, the House and Ballroom scene has not been supported by any type of government grants, federal funding, or anything like that. But a lot of us are doing the work similarly to the way that I do it, out of our own pockets, out of the kindness of our heart. So I think that it's an important part of this conversation when we're talking about engaging families is to be mindful and understand that that ballroom scene is a part of that as well.
Thank you for that. So you hit on really the personal values and sort of the commitment of connecting with family and how you showed up in this work. So I wanted to pass that question along to Lindell and Kelly. Do you have any personal values and commitments, things that you think really are a part of you that you would like to show in this work? Any stories or examples that tie into that too as well would be welcome. So Lindell, Kelly.
So I'll just say that I'm also from Longview, Texas. Caleb and I are from the same little area, really, in East Texas, and grew up with a lot of family, and so the supports in my life have been primarily family and friends who act like family for me in my life. So as I became involved in all different kinds of social service work, I'm a long-time social worker, I particularly was drawn to mentoring and the work that we do with mentoring and establishing a program here because of the extra web of support that mentoring can offer in a very personal way with adults and kids that are wanting that extra support in their lives. And so for us, in the work that we're doing here at Longview, which is matching mentors with young people, primarily middle school and high school students, what we're trying to do is work on building that extra web of support so people can really thrive and feel supported in all kinds of ways. We know that there's a difference between sort of that bonding support that people have, where they have those informal, strong relationships that keep us grounded. But then there's also that bridging support where people come into our lives, and if we connect with them, then we're interested. Those are the folks that help us move ahead. They may move us out of our comfort zone some, but help us thrive in new and different ways. And so I was really drawn into the idea that what's been most important to me in my life is the support of my family and friends, but also other mentors who have helped me at all different times in my life, raising my children, all those kinds of things, where I've needed extra support, and I needed it in a personal way. And so that's why I like this whole idea of family engagement, that we're describing family as much broader than biological members of our group, that we're looking at that in a much broader way. Who are those support systems, and how do we build in more support for young people?
Kelly, did you have anything to add to that?
Sure. I'll just share a little bit. I was born and raised here in Missouri in the foster care system. I lived in foster care from birth to 18. And through that experience, and then after aging out of foster care, living house to house and experiencing homelessness, I was able to somehow pull myself together and get a whole degree, which is surprising these days for youth in foster care. And then, I ended up gravitating more and more toward working with youth, first in teaching, and then eventually social services. And through the Chafee program first for youth, in foster care to learn those independent living skills. And then I started a street outreach program for unhoused youth. And then I ended up here at the Foster and Adoptive Care Coalition, working in a program that is now evidence-based called 30 Days to Family, where when youth and children first enter the foster care system, we build their family trees. We have no less than 80 relatives on every family tree, and we begin engaging relatives within the first 30 days they're actually in foster care. That way, helping to keep them connected to their community right as soon as they enter the system, and then building community around them. From there, we had this great idea to do something similar for older youth in foster care in St. Louis, to give them an opportunity to have their family trees built, to search for their relatives, and have a better understanding of who they are and what their story has been. So for the last several years now, I've been building huge family trees and also creating timelines for youth, going back into their file and trying to understand better where they come from, what their story is, and understanding those details that, so many of the adults in their lives tend to kind of forget about, or, they don't have a record keeper per se in their life, and so their stories and their histories become very fragmented. I find the family engagement and building community to be extremely difficult work, and I put a lot of time and effort into figuring out how to become better at doing that. And I still would not consider myself an expert, even though it's my main job, and I'm always trying to figure out how to get better at that particular piece. So here I am, and that's it.
Yeah, it's definitely a field that involves a lot of improvement upon not only the tools that you're given, but also improvement upon thinking, like coming into this with the mindset of, okay, I'm dealing with people who maybe don't feel as though they are connected to anyone. So how do you go about reestablishing those connections and dealing with those kind of people? What kind of tools and strategies do you find effective in dealing with that kind of situation when you have to reconnect these sort of people to not only their families but the larger community as a whole?
In Missouri, we have a law now that any kin or support person is essentially a relative for a child. So we consider family is our all-encompassing word for anybody, even a coach or a teacher or whomever. That is a meaningful person to that youth. So I've learned through, my program has been informed quite a bit by a model called the therapeutic. It's a clinical model, dyadic developmental psychotherapy, created by Dr. Daniel Hughes. And I'm not a clinician, so I kind of think of the model as a relational model and just how to be and how to work with other people. And so through this model, I was kind of forced to really think about how I, my own personal biases and issues I had when reaching out to relatives and community members on behalf of the youth. So, thinking about who they are in their own lives and being just as nurturing and understanding of who they are as human beings as I do naturally with youth. So when I have a relative or a support person that I'm reaching out to, I need to kind of meet them where they're at, just like we do with the youth. I think probably for everybody listening, there's that part of us that is natural to be nurturing and kind with the youth, but it's not always as easy to do with other adults, especially if those adults are not speaking as kindly as we would want them to about the youth. And so I do find that DDP component has been really helpful for me in thinking about how I'm engaging with those greater supports with the youth.
Okay. Lindell, Caleb, on that same piece, did you have anything to add to sort of the effective methods that you found useful in your own work?
So I would just add, or Caleb, feel free to jump in, but I would just add that for us, we're a program that probably in our earlier days, because of how the program started, was more school-based interventions with young people and matching mentors and mentees. We really have always had parent permission, but never really have engaged parents in a strong, meaningful way. That's a shift that we've made as a sub-grantee in the past year and a half. It's been a critically important shift for us as we think about really the support that young people need and the importance of their family, whoever that family might be in their lives, how the important role that they play and how much more effective outcomes are if the family feels like they're an integral part of what's happening and that they have input and that that input is valued and that we are intentionally seeking out that input all the time. So for us now, really from the very start when we first learn about a student and we're going to match them with a mentor, everyone gets together, the family, the mentor, the student, and we really spend time helping that family know that what they say and how they're involved with the child and the student and how they feel about how things are going all really matters to us, and we know that it matters to the student and that they are the experts on their student. And I'll just also say, like Kelly, I just think this is a field that we're always learning and growing. We never really, there's always changes. There's always new things to learn about how to better engage families. And then just on a very practical level for us, finding out what is the best way to communicate with families. What do they want us to use? Do they want to be called? Do they want to text? Just that sort of basic thing. And then being sensitive to the barriers that, in our situation, many of our students come from poverty, the struggle of poverty, and their phone numbers are changing often. They're moving a lot. that's not because they enjoy those situations. That's what life is for them. That's what their survival is. And so helping our really sensitizing our mentors and all involved to the struggles at families so that we all sort of bridge those gaps and begin to understand one another better is a big part of the whole family engagement for us, and being willing to meet families where they are and to really extend over and beyond what sort of the simple things. There's a lot of barriers, but barriers in some ways to family engagement, just in that it's harder work. It's harder work for us, I think. But at the same time, the benefits are huge. And for us with this program that we're doing, that outweighs any of the inconvenience, or just the, not so much inconvenience, but barriers to making those regular contacts.
I would just add that one of the things that we that I have been a proponent for, specifically in everything that I do, is understanding that mentorship is it works two ways, and it works both ways, and that sometimes when you're sowing into someone, that you also can be sown in, your life can be sown into. But I think that particular thing is very important when considering the ballroom community, because I think now that we are coming to the point where a lot more people are talking about the house and ballroom community, those conversations are coming up more, and what we have tend to see in the past is where we have this engagement where individuals are trying to be a part of the work or part of the things that we've done, but it's only a nominal thing where they come in and, you know, provide a little bit of incentive, maybe food for a meeting to be able to assess the ballroom community's thoughts on a specific thing, and then not actually any follow-up. It's very important that through this process of mentorship that we continue to sow the seeds so that people of the community can begin to take over the roles of mentors in their own communities. And I think that that's something that the ballroom community has done a really good job of actually showing through the parent system that they have, where individuals who come on as a part of the community, a part of a house, they are the children in the scene, and they work their way up to being parents, where they become the mentors, but that street works both ways. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that it's also very important for folks to understand that in this community specifically, it's those communities that people often say are hidden or hidden communities. So there's people who engage in injection drug use, people who engage in survival sex work, people who engage in a lot of different things that are considered those hidden populations who oftentimes our point-in-time counts do not capture. So if at any point in time that it's more critical and most important for us to make sure that those people are a part of those conversations, it's now. And the ways to be able to bring those people into the conversations is by, number one, developing a relationship with these individuals that is not just a nominal thing where you're giving them food, but that you have a connection with those folks and that you provide them with the tools to be able to address issues in their community themselves. And I see that there's a question about incentives, gift cards, and just to mention that I don't know exactly what you were talking about, but in my experience in talking about incentives, they absolutely are ways to help get people in the room. Gift cards are one thing, but if say for example it's an Amazon gift card, but the individual who is trying to attend your program has issues paying their phone bill, then that may not necessarily be something that's going to be it's not going to work for them. So just be considerate of how you are, if you are incentivizing individuals, which you should be for spending whatever time that they are with you, that you are paying them in ways that make sense for them. And True Colors also has information and insight on ways that you can diversify your funding to be able to make sure that you're paying individuals, especially folks who are a part of people placed at the margins, we're paying them in ways that works for them best.
Thank you. I see that a lot in my own community too. We'll have to transition to slides. So thank you everyone for answering these questions. We'll return to our panel a little bit later. So a large piece on what Caleb ended on was speaking about rethinking family engagement. So I'll hand that over to Kendon. I know you had a few things to say about that. So yeah.
I do. Thanks, Andre. And I just really appreciate the points that our panel made about, I mean, both just how critical these relationships are, and everything from Kelly talking about the sort of casting a broad net in many ways and the intentional ways through DDP that that engagement works. I also, you know, some of the things that Lyndall and Caleb said just around the strategies of really navigating and the challenges with those relationships, and also like the strength that they can bring if we put that hard work in. So appreciate that from the panel, and I think we're going to move forward talking just a little bit about some of the things that we see in the research, that we see in practice, and then we want to go back to the panel for some more practical suggestions as well. So as we begin that, though, we want to pull up another poll to hear from you all about the current strategies that you're using. So how confident do you feel in your current strategies to engage families and really connect young people with a broader network of support? And we'd love to see you all weigh in on that. And as both Kelly and Lyndall mentioned, this is always a work in progress, right? Like none of us arrive, that relationships take work. All of them are unique, and so we're always learning and growing. Give one more minute for this. Okay, so it looks like we mostly have a range of somewhat confident to neutral to mostly confident. And so, and a few not at all confident. And so I'm happy actually to see that kind of spread. And I think that there's really an opportunity not only today, but on an ongoing basis for us to think about how do we learn from one another as we do this work. And so we'll talk about that at the end of the webinar, and in the survey we ask you to take of what are potential future things that you might want to engage in as we all try to collectively move forward in this work. And so with that, I'll ask just for another poll, if you could share something that you are currently doing in this area at your organization or in your program to engage family, engage young people's larger network of support. We'd love to just hear a few examples. Okay, so some of the things that it's like we're seeing a lot of really great examples. So, you know, working with young people and getting that consent and bringing young, the meaningful adults to the table, parent surveys, thinking about those barriers, engaging families in activities, social events. So you can see a lot of different examples there of ways that folks are doing this currently. Yeah, so feel free, we're going to close this poll up, but feel free to add other things in the chat if you want to share some of the great work that you're doing or have an idea that you might want to share that might benefit someone else. We would love to hear those and capture them. And so, you know, as we move forward, I did just want to talk about this shift that we're seeing over, I would say, the past 5 years. We're definitely seeing some significant shifts across organizations and across sectors. looking at families and particularly parents, from looking at them as a problem to really embracing them as potentially a part of the solution. And I think there is a move to try to move away from stereotypes that we have about families. You know, as programs, and I think when I started in this field, I'd often hear language that, you know, the parents of youth experiencing whatever, right, whatever program they're in are absent, or they're abusive, or they're not good, or they're somehow negative in the lives of the young people. And sometimes what we see is that a lot of times families may want to be supportive and want to be there for the young person, but there has to be really significant crisis or abuse before families can get the support and help that they need. And so what we really want to think about is how do we put supports in the lives of families so that there doesn't have to be that crisis for there to be strength, so that you know, that we can really leverage sort of the power that we have to support families in the way that they really need, and allowing them to drive the way that that looks, because it does really have to be individualized. And we also have to navigate some of those previous experiences that families have had with systems that often, you know, they have had negative experiences or even trauma based on the systems and services that they've encountered. And so we really have to work upstream in many ways and think about how do we counter those experiences, those messages that they've gotten, and often the shame and stigma that goes with families asking for help. And so we know, and as Andre mentioned, the spider web, and just sort of what we see with spider webs is the strength and flexibility that they have, and that spider webs can stretch up to 10 times of their actual space. You know, and I think that as we think about relationships, the connection across all of the research, decades of research, consistently show the positive impacts of having consistent and supportive relationships in our lives. And, you know, a couple of those to highlight are just that relationships provide access to resources, both in the community, emotional, social support. Relationships have been proven in the research to increase physical and mental health, to increase wellness, to prevent a whole host of things, right? We could say anything from addiction to homelessness to child welfare involvement, school dropout rate, whatever. All of those things have shown up in the research as the power of relationships in preventing them. There's also the opportunity for generational healing. As I mentioned, often families, and sometimes through 3 and 4 generations, have experienced the negative impacts of systems. And so with that engagement and with that authentic relationship building, there's an opportunity for not only healing those connections within that individual or that family unit, but also the multi-generations, right? So the messages that their children get from that, and the messages that other extended families get about the different resources and services and the way that we show up can be healing and can have an impact. It's also that often when young people are separated from their family of origin or the family that they are most connected with, there's a loss of culture. There's a loss of connection to the traditions, whether that be like holidays or sort of cultural connections and traditions and aspects in our lives, whether that's faith or music or whatever that is, that young people often lose that when they lose that connection to their immediate family. That sometimes those bigger extended family or community connections can be disrupted. And so what we find with the maintaining of those relationships and the healing of those relationships, that those bigger extended supports can be maintained and even strengthened.
Thank you.
So, yeah, so I'm going to hand it over to you, Andre.
So I'm seeing a lot of questions surrounding the who and the how of like how engagement goes, how we go about engaging youth, engaging families and communities, things of that sort. The method that we've found typically working is it starts with identifying any key members of the youth support network, anyone that they self-identify as being important to them. These could be family members, these can be friends, these can be people that they look up to as mentors. It really just, you know, all of that lies on them and who do they see as being important for their network. We like to go about this in the sense of letting the youth take the lead. So we're just really supposed to be placing them in an environment which is able to help them grow their community. How, like, do we identify said community is also another question. Well, that also comes around, what does the youth see themselves, like, where does the youth see themselves, rather? We see many youth come in and they say, I want someone to, like, help guide me, like, I want, like, some sort of mentor. And then the question to that is, a mentor for what? Like, life skills? Do you want it for a specific interest that you have? We find that is often the case. So we have to go about identifying what it is the youth then needs, and then identifying, like, where that support would come in place. Often it does not really take much to actually get them into these spaces. The biggest piece is identifying what is actually supposed to, what is the connection, what is the role of the connection, rather. And then also sort of seeing how do we place them in such a space, and how do we just allow that establishment of, like, a connection to continue growing and things of that sort. Because often, you know, we make connections and then don't follow up on them and things like that. So it's really just letting the youth take the lead, and then also encouraging them to keep up with some of those ties. You know, sometimes we often make ties and we sort of fall out of, like, our networks because we don't really think too much about, like, the people that we actually have connections to. So sometimes that just starting there is, like, the biggest aspect that helps us to actually start linking these individuals into communities and the larger area as a whole. So some key things to note are these are not always biological family, and these changes may not happen quickly or suddenly. So it really depends on the individual and the levels of engagement, and all we really have to be there to do, all we really should be there to do is support them in everything. So just focus on that key focus and aspect of linking youth to their communities based on who they identify as being important to them. With that, I will hand it back over to you, Kendall.
Thanks, Andre. I think that's just critically important. And just to reference that one more time is just, you know, when we think of family, we do think really beyond just sort of this, often what we see in the field is this traditional sort of mother or father or sister or brother or very narrow view of a biological family. But really thinking of, as several of our panelists referenced, this chosen or kinship or broader network of support. And we see in the research that particularly chosen and kinship families show up as in the research as really increasing resilience and protective factors for individuals that are particularly marginalized. So we see this a lot, you know, as Caleb mentioned, in the queer community, with LGBTQ youth in those family structures. We see this with youth of color, particularly African American and Latinx families. as well as immigrant communities and in faith groups. And so we see this in a lot of different contexts. And so I think that it's just really critical to remember that particularly when folks have been disenfranchised and marginalized, that the language that they use might be different as well, and that we should really follow a young person's lead in where we go with those conversations. And we have a couple of tools and resources that we're going to share of what this could look like. And we're going to hear a little bit more from our panel about this as well. But as we talk about family, this is also what we mean. And so we really mean an expansive view of family. So as I mentioned, a couple of tools that we've recently developed, I want to bring those over and actually just show you a couple of what they look like. So if I can, Emily, if you can support us in the background, I'm bringing those over. Some of these things are unique and not unique. And so one of the tools, and so what we've developed is sort of a kit that is called Mapping Connections, and it has a couple of tools that are optional for you to use. And what we found, and I'll scroll down and show you, but what we found is we use eco-mapping a lot. And so just really identifying the different types of connections and the different strengths of connections that young people have in their lives. There's also a Circles of Support resource that we use. And both of these are available to download in the Downloads pod. But it maps both what are those closest connections and most immediate connections, sort of those anchor points that a young person has, and then extending out those circles from there. So really looking at those school connections and mentor connections and housing supports and extended family and whatever that means. But once we can identify the supports that a young person has existing, then we can both build on those, we can support them in strengthening those, and or it allows us to think through the challenges in some of those relationships and ways that we can support young people maybe in setting boundaries or identifying their goals for those relationships. And so we've provided this resource, and I think the most important piece of the resource is actually this discussion guide that is pulled up right now of just some guiding questions, because the discussion is really where the magic is of how we have these conversations is so critical to where we go with them. And if we come in as sort of as providers with this idea of, okay, tell me who your family is and who these people, okay, you have your teacher, you have this person, that might not be the folks that the young people feels the most connected to or has the most trust in. And so these kind of tools really allow us to have the young person guide that and to use ways that explore that creatively as opposed to let's list it in the intake packet who these individuals are. What I've also found just in my direct practice work too is that some young people are all individuals. All of us are individuals, and I've literally put a big flip chart paper on the wall and given someone markers and said, like, let's draw out what your connections look like. So this can look a lot of different ways. We're providing these tools not as a you need to use this, only as a couple of examples of tools and templates that could be used as you have these conversations. And so, Emily, if you can pull that back over. And I would say that these kinds of tools can really provide insight as well as you're thinking about matching a young person with a mentor, with a therapist, with some other type of support, because you can really see where those gaps are or where the lack of resources or social capital or where those needs really are. and where the young person's interests are in developing more relationships. So as we think about some of the different, and as our panelists mentioned earlier, there are many different both challenges that come up when we do this difficult work sometimes of engaging families and those larger supports, and as well as the different opportunities that exist in that. And so I'm going to hand it over to Andre, and we're going to discuss some of these challenges and opportunities, and then we're going to go to our panel to hear more about what this looks like in their work. So Andre, I'll hand it to you.
So some opportunities and challenges in engaging youth supports that we have found is key to identifying and thinking about things in a more practical manner as opposed to the way that we are typically formulaically going about it. So over time, most recently, there's been a sort of shift within systems. Typically, we viewed parents and sort of the family situation as the issue, and we will go about it in the way of, like, you know, connecting the youth to other options and other opportunities outside of that. But recently, we found that, you know, thinking pragmatically, this is actually it's actually most helpful to engage the family as part of the solution to these issues that we occur when necessary. So we have to move away from some of the stereotypes that we have about families, parents, things that may be seen as like critical issues with the youth's connections may also within them lie good solutions if we just think about it and think about re-engaging the youth in a way that is most beneficial but then also most productive. So we have to think of families that as a resource and allies as opposed to just always being the factor that is holding back the youth from actually engaging in opportunities and things of the sort. It would be best if we can just, you know, all collectively come together and work on a more efficient solution to these sorts of things. And, you know, and of course, in some cases, there has to be significant sort of restructuring of how things work or some sort of interventions between provider and family as far as engaging upon which route is the best for the youth and what the youth says is not helping them. And we just sort of have to go along with these things to engage upon the best solution. Remember that as the provider, you have all the leverage and you have some leverage in dictating sort of what the family engagement looks like, but you also have to think about you can also have a large role in shaping and reconnecting these pieces of otherwise lost connections. So take the youth as the lead and support them in developing these sort of things. And these skills and experiences can sort of help them navigate these issues and turn into solutions. So, Kendra?
Yeah. Absolutely. Thanks, Andre. And I think that one of the things that I can say from my experience has really stood in the way of me doing this well as a provider has been my own biases, right, and my own stereotypes and perceptions of what families should do or how they should be, or not really understanding the whole picture and just seeing what comes to my door and not, I think earlier, especially in my career, not really digging into all of the things in the background that present barriers for families. So I think definitely, you know, we have our own implicit biases regarding families that get reinforced time and again, right, in the teams that we're on, in the other providers we encounter, in the systems in which we work. And families also have their own implicit bias because of often negative experiences or trauma within systems. And sometimes that might be their own, and sometimes that might be like, oh, my friends and neighbors and cousins and whatever. And so, again, you know, the environment shapes us and our attitudes about things. And so that's one of the challenges that comes up.
Yeah, and we also see that extend beyond just families to cultural. You know, certain races, religions, and gender roles typically have been enforced by the system historically in ways that make people not want to engage upon it. So it might be a little more difficult to engage with members of those sort of communities because they sort of have a view of how the system works and what it does that isn't positive. So we have to think about how do we rewrite those narratives and help actually reconnect that piece and actually so we can actually be efficient in this work.
And the other thing is power. So we have to recognize that just we represent the system, whether that is the way that we approach this work or not, that we represent that. And there are power dynamics that exist, particularly if we're thinking about, you know, folks working in like the foster care system or child welfare system, juvenile justice system, things like that, that there are definitely power dynamics between the system and the family. And there's also dynamics that exist within family structures that are all unique. And so sometimes we're walking in to starting to work with a family and we don't have an understanding of that. And so it's really, really important that we go slow and do a lot of listening and do a lot of observing and to start to really understand the culture, you know, what are those perceptions, what are the dynamics within that family structure to most effectively support.
So another piece of that is that comes along with power is respect. So in order to get really anywhere, we have to start with a sense of respect for one another and understanding our goals, values, and roles in exactly how this work will go about. We have to listen without judgment, and sometimes that's hard to do knowing the past or situations or whatever you do know, but we have to sort of set that aside in order to step ahead and actually begin on making progress.
Mm-hmm. And then just balancing, right? We have to balance the young person's preferences and their needs versus like the family's preferences and what they think they need and then what they think the young person needs. And just really remembering that we want it to be a partnership and that it's reciprocal and everyone comes with something that they can contribute and something they can gain from those relationships.
And also that ties into norms, certain lifestyles, changes, and otherwise like differing effects in one's life could sort of alter how their connections sort of work and how their networks will go about connecting and sort of functioning on their own. So we have to take into account people doing things like moving, entering new phases in our life, and things of that sort when we think about how we're going to engage different supports and build on different connections. So, keeping on to that idea of sort of opportunities and challenges, you have to keep in mind that we don't want to wall up these we don't want to build walls around these networks. We don't want to continue just shutting people off because we as ourselves haven't properly identified and analyzed the challenges and opportunities of the network to then move efficiently into the next steps. So we have to keep an open mind about that. With that, we will go to our panel, and we would like to think about that idea of connections, building upon walls, breaking down walls and building bridges. So on that idea, Caleb, I know that both of us being younger, we've seen a lot of differences in generations, and how do we go about sort of unwriting that sort of narrative that exists between different generations, so we can get sort of to that mutual agreement and building upon those connections that may not be there otherwise.
I think that one of the ways to begin to, I guess, bridge the intergenerational divide would be similar to what I mentioned earlier about understanding that mentorship works both ways. I think that a lot of young people have become a little bit jaded by it when they didn't hear the concept of mentorship and just assume like, oh, this could potentially just be an older person telling me what I should do. Other people actually seek out that type of dynamic, but I think that it's important for whenever these relationships are formed for folks to be open to them being very specific to who that person is. So having conversations and developing relationships that help you understand exactly how that person wants to be engaged or wants to be communicated with, and doing it that way and collaborating on the ways that work for both of you. I think that would begin to at least open up the conversations on the intergenerational divide and hopefully begin to bridge the gap. The other thing that I will say is that it's important for older folks to understand that as youth and young adults in navigating systems that we may not have a PhD in, social work. We may not have a degree in whatever, but we definitely have a degree in our lived experience of navigating the system. And so it's important that we allow that lived experience to inform our systems, to inform our practices, to inform our strategies, and continue to uplift and highlight the voices of youth and young adults who are impacted by these systems. Just to circle it back again to ballroom, I think that is an example of ways that when you are empowering young people's voices and give them autonomy over their own decisions, how that this community of people, of individuals, can then thrive. So I just again want to say that one of the best ways to be able to bridge the gap is just to be able to have communication and understand that everybody communicates in ways that works best for them and want to be communicated in ways that works best for them.
Yes, I would definitely agree. Going back to some of the ideas that we had earlier about like organic versus intentional connection building, we once set up a sort of like a roundtable with just some young advocates in the community, and we just reached out to people that were directly connected to us, whether in their programs or people that we just knew in the community, and we sort of just sat down and sort of had like a community rant, and that was like good enough to build some of those connections up in itself. So I definitely agree to that piece of just like having people be able to communicate respectfully, because once you have younger and older generations, a lot of things that we think about the other become a lot more clear and make a lot more sense when we're actually sitting down face-to-face with, people that we might otherwise think of as like, oh my God, like they don't know what they're talking about. So it's really good to just be able to bring everyone into the room, so to speak. So going back to like that sense of like intergenerational connections, so how do some of these generational links occur within your communities, whether it's natural or like you have intentionally sort of like strategically built these connections? And what have you taken away from the strength of those? And that's a question for everyone. So
I'll just jump in and build on what Caleb just said. I think it's a great opportunity in mentoring to start training folks about how to be open to other people and understanding differences. It's a great opportunity to begin to open up the mind of folks that come to that want to be helpful to young people. But as Caleb mentioned, a lot of times young people are going, oh, what, how you can't relate to me. You look, you know nothing about my life, kind of thing. But from our end, it's also a great opportunity it's a great opportunity just to, because of the mentoring program requires training and orientation and that sort of thing, and a certain number of that. Also, people checking in on them about how they're interacting with youth. We do lots of group activities where we can kind of watch that interaction and begin to help people, our mentors particularly, come into this with the idea that they're learning from the young people, not going to straighten out some, the young person, but coming in to know that young person and to understand the world in a broader sense. And I think that's one of the great benefits of matching people across generations, if they're open to the idea that there's a lot to be learned and a lot of connections to be made and a lot of understanding that needs to be built. So that's probably where we're coming from a lot, even understanding socioeconomic differences, just all of the different things that all of the ways that barriers are built in the lives of young people. But at the same time, it's always surprising to see, you might see people who look very different from one another forge a very strong friendship where they really support one another, and that's kind of what we're going for, rather than those mentors coming in to tell you what to do. So that's usually not the person we're looking for to be a good mentor, or building those areas of support for young people.
So people, speaking about sort of engaging people to just beyond generational links, we also have like broader circles of support, maybe some of those sort of niche connections that maybe aren't as formal or as like relatable to the average person. Like me personally, I went to an art program and I left with about like 6 people that I would just like know and love for like the rest of my life. Completely like unconventional, completely unplanned. It's just like something that occurred naturally. So how do you go about engaging your youth in broader circles of support? Maybe some people that are not family, maybe people that are just sharing interests or things of that sort, life skills, coaches, things that maybe not everyone can sort of just say, oh yeah, I have someone that fills that role. How do you go about building on those?
I can speak to that. In my program, because I do a lot of digging, I look back at past schools, past neighborhoods, any girls and boys clubs, after-school programs, daycare centers, previous placements in foster homes, just every entity, whether it's within the neighborhood or a school system that exists, and I work really hard to kind of, with the youth and with youth permission and consent, of course, I work really hard to kind of look at those places and think with the youth about, was there a safe adult? Was there somebody that you could confide in during that time when you lived in this place or went to that school? Was there a neighbor, religious organizations, friends, parents, friends, grandmothers, anybody that you felt a connection to at one time or another. And through that, I really want to start to help the youth think about if that might be someone that they would like to reach out to again. And if not, then that's also a great example of a past healthy relationship that they once had. And getting them to think about all of the people that have been in and out of their lives. The thing that sticks in our brains are more of those negative experiences. And so by rethinking and looking back and taking note of those positive relationships, we can start to build on more positive relationships from there.
I would definitely agree. Sometimes those like negative thoughts like sort of stop people from making connections, and it's really just about like sort of turning those negativities and some of those fears that are irrational into like some positives, some optimism. I know a lot of people personally that are like, well, yeah, like I need a mentor and this person's great at it, but like, why would they want to talk to me? And like the response to that is, why wouldn't they want to talk to you? You know, like you're a face or someone who's dedicated your work, you put in the time and effort, and you're there. Like you're someone they're familiar with. So maybe we just have to nudge people to actually go about asking some of those deeper questions, making some of those deeper like personal ties that maybe they won't be confident enough to otherwise. That said, we had a few questions that were from the audience that showed up in the chat. So what are some tools to use when you are teaching life skills to youth who are not truly interested in the programs? So sort of speaking about like levels of engagement, how do we raise engagement and morale amongst the youth that are in our programs? And sort of how do we go about building up that sort of engagement? Anyone want to take the floor on that?
I
I'll
have a
jump in.
thought about this. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Oh, so when I have taught life skill classes in the past, and those youth didn't seem quite as engaged, one of the things that I learned from them is that it's hard to engage with these ideas. Life skills are more cognitive based, whereas if they're not quite, if they're still dealing with where am I going to sleep tonight, what's going to happen to me the next day, their brain is more focused on stability and safety. And even if they kind of have that like lackadaisical, I don't care, I'm too cool attitude, usually there's something deeper going on, because all of our behaviors as human beings is usually, working toward connection. And so when you have a kiddo that's not working, doesn't seem to be working toward that, I just find that there's something else in their life that's imbalanced and unable to, really wrap their brains around what you're trying to teach them. And that's just one aspect of something I've learned with life skills.
I would just add that if there is a trend of individuals who have not been interested in your program, specifically around the life skills part or anything else, then I would say then go back to the drawing board, but go back to the drawing board with young people at the table to say what would make this more interesting, what would make this more intriguing for you to actually access it. What we have seen a lot is that programs have been created without young people being a part of those conversations, and then they don't necessarily reach the people that they are meant to reach because they weren't in a part of the creation of it. I would also add that life skills classes, courses often have been reserved for folks who have not had access, and people who have had access have not had to go through life skills courses. Um, People who have had access to money and housing and whatever else, they learn life skills by making mistakes. So be understanding that if someone says, I don't want the life skills course, maybe that doesn't need to be a required part of your mentorship program. Maybe it should be something that's just offered and that is on the table, but it's not something that is a prerequisite in order for them to advance or move forward throughout your process. Being fully transparent, a lot of us who have had access, folks who have had access, learn how to clean up their house or pay bills on time by making mistakes, by someone telling them that their house is dirty and they need to clean it up. And so we have to be cognizant of that. Typically we treat young people who have experiences of housing instability and homelessness, we tend to coddle or try to become parental for them and tell them what's best for them. I think it's a lot more advantageous for you to allow the space and say, here's some of the things that we offer. We offer life skills, financial management, blah, 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 blah. What do you think works for you? What are the best things that works for you? And then always leave that on the table and leave it as an offering if they ever want to engage in that again.
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes you have to have the courage to just go and say, all right, we just sort of need to do everything over. Like when you engage upon youth, sometimes they're just like, man, this isn't for me. So you have to ask, so what is for you? And if they're giving things that are completely unaligned with what you have, then maybe that's for the best that you go and redesign your model and rethink some of those strategies and methods that you had and were going about implementing. So
Can I add one quick thing? Yeah.
Sorry.
I'll just add one quick thing, and that is sometimes I think just the names we use for things, how we talk about things like, do I want to go to something called life skills, or maybe, I don't know, but there might be another way to talk about that, but it's also just remembering, and I mentioned this in the box, and so that'll be that list of activity books. But there, we do a lot of things to engage young people, just to help build some camaraderie in whatever group we're working with them in, and also for adults that are trying to get out of poverty, those kinds of things. A lot of engagement sort of activities that are fun, that also help build connections with people, commonalities. We might not look much alike, but what do we have in common? And so you're always trying to build those support systems in whatever classes or whatever we're doing that way. So we try to have, we try to make everything as fun as possible, and based on what young people and folks that are coming to the groups want to do and want to be about. So that's just another piece of how we do it. So that list of activities, resources, I'll be happy to share with you, Collaboratory, and that can go out.
Okay. The one other thing I would say too is I've seen a lot of positive impacts of having peers lead those things. So if you, for some reason, have to do like a life skills group or something, is like other young people have these life skills and everyone has different ones. And so actually making it more of a shared learning opportunities, so showing each other, different skills, or going into the community and practicing those skills together, that type of thing. So I'm seeing another question from the chat about generational healing. What is generational healing and how does it occur? So that was something that I mentioned earlier. I didn't know if anyone from the panel wanted to speak to that before I say anything.
I can talk about it really quickly just because it's something that I have to address with each family that I'm working with in terms of, how the adults and were once youth and something may have happened to them, and on back and on back and on back. And if I'm not being empathetic and attuned and validating where they're coming from, then I'm not forming a relationship. I'm not doing anything at that moment to help the youth who, that I'm working with. So I've definitely learned that I need to really meet the family where they're at and hear about their needs, their hopes, their desires, their losses, in order to even begin to think about moving forward and building healthy relationships. So it's about understanding their trauma, their attachment styles, and then moving forward from there.
Thanks, Kelly. So I know I just I wanted to just express my gratitude again to the panel. Thank you so much for coming. And I know there were a lot of questions in the chat that we didn't get to as well. And so what we can do is look back through those and address some of those. And when we send out the recording, we can send, a few of the answers or like panel responses and our responses to some of those questions to share some additional strategies. Don't forget that the links are live links that are available in the PowerPoint. And then we just want to share a few key takeaways from our panel today and from our discussion. So, Andre, I'll hand that to you.
So starting with sort of maybe one of the bigger key takeaways is remember to follow the young person's lead. It is very important to let the young person sort of establish what they want from their connections, what they want to see in their systems of support, and it is your job as sort of like a peer advisor to sort of go along with them in that, help them sort of take those steps to strengthen their connections and everything like that. Remember to invite those identified that as important members of said system of support to the fullest extent that they can, so that you can make the strongest connections possible and strengthen and find the biggest values and all that. Set aside all your assumptions and judgments so that you can actually be efficient in stepping forward, and support young people in making sense of the traumas that they may have experienced in their relationships. Remember to encourage them to take healthy risks, sometimes to step forward and not be so passive in their methods of engaging with their supports, and address logistical barriers such as transportation and other needs that they may need to reestablish that connections. And overall, just remember to develop community partnerships to support their families, chosen or bloodline, whatever. Just remember that this is the biggest sort of guideline and sort of the overall goal in all of this.
Awesome. So we're gonna hand it back over to Katie to close up, and if you have to sign off, definitely complete the evaluation before you go.
Yeah, thank you, Kenan, and thank you all for sharing your work with us. Thank you to everyone who's attended and the great feedback and questions that you've had. I did want to just, as we wrap up, I've got a couple more resources to share, but also wanted to let you know, if you have enjoyed this conversation, Youth Collaboratory is a membership organization, and we would love to have you as a member. Our membership is now open, and you can go to the link and learn more about what it means to be a member. But one of the great benefits is opportunities to have more conversations like this. I think, as you heard, there's a lot of follow-up conversations and questions that we would love to explore. And one of the things that we're able to do through membership is bring together small groups of folks to kind of have this conversation, not with 300 of your closest friends, but in a smaller group conversation where we can really dig in deeper. So take a moment and learn more about membership and opportunities for that. Also, as you see in the chat box, there is a link to the evaluation. This is a great way. There's an opportunity in there if you want to continue to have this conversation. There's a place in there to let us know that as well, so that we can stay connected together. And then I want to leave you with Kendon and Andre's contact information. We'll be sending out a recording of this for those of you that have asked. You can also download the PowerPoint. There's some hidden additional resources in that files to download PowerPoint. So definitely make sure that you grab that before you leave the room today, as well as the Measuring Up resource, which has some great measurement